The hum of the ship's engines was a steady, comforting sound as Captain Imani Delaris leaned back in her chair, eyes fixed on the dark expanse of space outside the cockpit. The cargo run had been routine, almost too routine for her taste. She craved action, the kind of chaos that kept her sharp. Her fingers drummed against the metal armrest, impatience swirling just beneath the surface. Then, the message came. The alert blinked on her console, a small red light pulsing softly. She frowned, leaning forward as the holographic display flared to life. Static buzzed in the air for a moment, and then a raspy voice filled the cabin. "My wives are yours now, human. Protect them." Imani blinked, confusion flooding her mind as the words sank in. The speaker's labored breathing crackled through the comms, but the figure on the other end of the transmission was barely visible, shrouded in shadow. Its final words were eerie, echoing with desperation. Before she could respond, the transmission cut off, leaving only the soft hum of the engines and the fading after-image of the hologram in the air. Imani's brow furrowed as she adjusted her worn leather jacket, a faint chill crawling up her spine. She flicked her eyes to the coordinates that had come with the message, locked in her navigation system. "Well, this is new," she muttered under her breath, her fingers already programming the ship's trajectory toward the unknown destination. Her ship, the Resolute, cut through space like a dagger, making its way toward the coordinates. Imani couldn't shake the sense of unease that gnawed at her gut. The message had been cryptic, but that tone was unmistakable. It was the plea of someone at the edge of death. Soon the alien vessel came into view. Sleek, organic-looking, with a soft bioluminescent glow along its hull. It was unlike anything Imani had ever seen, even with her years of experience hopping between planets and galaxies. Her fingers hovered over the controls as the ship's docking systems engaged automatically, pulling her ship toward it. "All right. Let's see what kind of mess I've stepped into this time," she muttered, pulling her weapon from its holster and clipping it to her belt as the ship settled with a soft thud inside the alien docking bay. The Resolute's hatch slid open with a hiss, and Imani stepped into the glowing chamber beyond. Her boots echoed softly on the strange, slick surface, the air thick with a faint, sweet scent she couldn't quite place. She barely had time to adjust to the alien atmosphere before two figures emerged from the shadows. Imani stopped short, her hand instinctively hovering over the grip of her blaster. The figures were tall, nearly a head taller than Imani, with skin the color of midnight sky, a soft glow radiating off their flawless blue-tinged forms. Their hair flowed like waves of liquid silver, framing sharp, mesmerizing faces. Their eyes, one pair violet and the other an ethereal silver, locked onto Imani with a gaze so intense it sent a shiver through her body. For a moment, Imani's voice failed her. "I am Sonara," the taller of the two spoke, her voice commanding and elegant, filled with an otherworldly resonance that made the air vibrate. "And this is Alethea, my bonded mate." Alethea stepped forward, her eyes gleaming with curiosity as a slow, enigmatic smile spread across her lips. "We have been waiting for you," she purred, her voice softer, playful, but with an edge that hinted at hidden depths. Imani, thrown off by their appearance and the sudden intensity of the moment, managed to find her voice. "I'm Imani Delaris, captain of the Resolute. I got your message. What exactly do you mean by wives?" She tried to keep her voice steady, but the uncertainty in her own words was unmistakable. Sonara's eyes narrowed, as if Imani's question was unnecessary. "Our bondmate Fethrin is dead. By Valkari custom, his death means you, the human he chose, inherit the bond. You are now our partner." Imani's heart raced. "Wait, partner? Hold on, this bond thing? What does that even mean? I'm not looking to get involved in any relationships." "I was just answering the distress signal." Alethea stepped closer, her presence immediately disarming. She tilted her head, studying Imani with an intensity that made her blood run hot. "This is not just about a relationship, Captain. You are bound to us now. We are yours, as you are ours. It is our way." Imani opened her mouth to protest, but the words died on her lips as Sonara moved in beside Alethea, their towering presence leaving her feeling uncharacteristically small. "Fethrin believed you were worthy," Sonara said, her gaze piercing. "That means you are responsible for us now." "Responsible?" Imani echoed, her tone sharp. "I didn't ask for this. I'm a cargo runner, not whatever this is. And what about protection? What kind of danger are we talking about?" A flash of something dark crossed Alethea's face, her playful demeanor slipping for the briefest moment. "There are forces that want what we carry. We are being hunted, Captain." Before Imani could respond, the ship shuddered, and the lights flickered ominously. An alert flashed across her wrist display, multiple unidentified vessels closing in fast. The alien women remained calm, But the tension in the air thickened as the realization of their precarious situation dawned on Imani. The weight of this bond, of these two women now standing before her, fell heavy on her shoulders. She was bound to them. The word echoed in her mind like a heavy chain tightening around her chest. They weren't just asking for her help. They were claiming her as their protector, their partner in a fight she had yet to understand. Imani swallowed, her hand brushing the hilt of her blaster. "All right," she muttered, eyes narrowing. "You've got yourself a captain, but we need to move. Now." Sonara's lips curved in approval, and Alethia's eyes gleamed with something that looked dangerously like satisfaction. The bond was set, and Imani Delaris had just taken her first step into a new, inescapable destiny. Imani paced the length of her ship's control room, her thoughts a tangled web of frustration and confusion. The Resolute was soaring through the endless dark of space, moving fast, but not fast enough. Every hour felt like a lifetime now, the weight of her new responsibility sinking in deeper with each passing minute. Sonara and Alethea sat quietly at the far end of the room, speaking in low, musical tones in their alien tongue. Imani could feel their eyes on her, tracking her every move like predators watching prey. She had always been comfortable alone, in control of her life, her ship, her destiny. Now, two otherworldly women sat on board her vessel, tied to her by some ancient custom she barely understood. Her pulse quickened as she thought of them. Their presence was as overwhelming as their beauty, and it was starting to affect her in ways she didn't want to admit. When Alethea had touched her arm earlier, the electric shock of it lingered long after their skin had parted. Imani clenched her fists, determined to push those thoughts aside. There were bigger problems to worry about. She pulled up the ship's diagnostics on the glowing console in front of her. The numbers scrolled by, reassuring her that everything was running smoothly, but the growing unease in her gut wouldn't settle. She wasn't the type to rattle easily, but this situation was different. Dangerous. A soft chime sounded, followed by the AI's voice breaking the tense silence. Incoming message, Captain Delaris, unidentified source. Imani's eyes narrowed. Patch it through. The screen flickered, and a face appeared. Cold, reptilian eyes stared back at her, framed by an armored helm that glinted in the dim light. The alien hissed, its forked tongue darting out as it spoke. "Captain Imani Delaris of the Resolute," the voice rasped, each word drawn out like a threat. "We know you carry the Valkari fugitives. Surrender them, and perhaps we will show mercy." Imani's heart slammed in her chest. "Who are you?" The alien's thin lips curled in a twisted grin. "I represent the Kralith cartel. Your cargo is of great interest to us human. The technology they carry, the power they possess, it belongs to us. You cannot outrun us. You cannot hide." Behind her, she heard Sonara rise from her seat, her movements deliberate and smooth. "We cannot allow them to capture us, Captain," she said softly, her voice as calm as ever, but there was a steel edge beneath it. "If the cartel seizes what we have, the entire sector will be at their mercy." Alethea stood beside Sonara, her violet eyes filled with worry. "They will hunt us until the ends of the galaxy," she whispered. "You have no idea what they're capable of." Imani felt a surge of frustration. Her life had been complicated enough before this, running cargo, dodging pirates, keeping her head down. Now, she was caught in the middle of an intergalactic chase with no clear path out. But she couldn't deny the thrum of adrenaline that coursed through her veins at the thought of facing down these alien hunters. It was a challenge, and Imani never backed down from a challenge. She cut off the transmission with a sharp flick of her wrist and turned to face Sonara and Alethea. "I'm not handing you over," she said, her voice firm, despite the doubt clawing at her insides. "But I need to know exactly what they're after. What is this technology?" Sonara and Alethea exchanged a glance, a silent conversation passing between them. It was Sonara who finally spoke, stepping closer to Imani, her presence dominating the small space between them. "We carry a Valkari biocore," Sonara said, her voice low but resolute. "A living, sentient technology capable of generating immense power. Whoever controls it can bend space itself, travel instantaneously across the galaxy, collapse star systems. The cartel wants it, and they will stop at nothing to have it." Imani's mouth went dry. The weight of their situation crashed down on her all at once. She wasn't just protecting these women from a vengeful cartel. She was guarding something that could change the balance of power in the entire galaxy. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" she demanded, her voice rising with frustration. Alethea stepped forward, her eyes soft with regret. "We didn't think you would believe us," she said. "It's hard enough accepting that you're bonded to us. This burden is not something we wanted to place on you, Captain." Imani ran a hand through her short-cropped hair, pacing again as her mind raced. The cartel was closing in. They didn't have much time before the inevitable confrontation. She turned to face Sonara and Alethea, her gaze hard, determined. "All right," she said. "Then we fight. We're not going down without one hell of a struggle." Alethea smiled, that same playful edge returning to her lips. "Good. I hoped you'd say that." As the warning alarms began to blare across the ship, Imani tightened her grip on the controls. The shadows of the cartel were closing in, and she was ready to meet them head-on. The low hum of the ship vibrated through Imani's body as she stood in the quiet of the cargo bay, staring at the shimmering containment unit in front of her. Inside, suspended in a web of glowing tendrils, was the Valkari biocore, a living machine unlike anything she'd ever encountered. Its pulsing light seemed to beat in rhythm with her own heart, each throb pulling her deeper into the mystery of the technology and the bond she had unwillingly inherited. The ship felt too quiet. Alethea and Sonara had gone to their quarters, leaving Imani alone with her thoughts. She had tried to distance herself from them ever since the cartel's message, telling herself that this was just another job, something to be handled, then left behind. But the bond she now shared with these two alien women wasn't so easy to shake. No matter how hard she fought it, she could feel the connection deepening. Every time Alethea looked at her with those violet eyes, playful yet tinged with something darker, something unsaid, Imani felt a pull, like gravity shifting beneath her feet. And Sonara was harder to read, her regal composure never wavering, but there was something raw underneath, a storm waiting to break. Imani could sense it every time their eyes met, as if they were circling each other, waiting for one of them to let their guard down. Imani clenched her fists, frustrated at herself. She didn't do feelings. She did action, decisions, control. But this was something different, something that twisted her in ways she couldn't control. A soft hiss broke the silence, and Imani spun around to see Alethea standing in the doorway, her silhouette bathed in the low, glowing light of the biocore. "I thought I'd find you here," Alethea said, her voice a gentle ripple in the still air. She walked toward Imani, her movements as fluid and graceful as ever. "You always retreat when you're conflicted, don't you?" Imani stiffened. "I'm not conflicted. I'm figuring things out." Alethea's lips curved into a soft, knowing smile. She moved closer, her fingertips brushing lightly against Imani's arm. The touch sent a jolt through her, as if the biocore's energy was transferring between them. "You can't deny what's happening, Captain. We are bound now, whether you want to accept it or not." Imani pulled away, stepping back toward the core, needing space. "This bond, whatever it is, it's not real. It's just Valkari customs, a formality. I didn't choose this." Alethea's smile faded, her eyes darkening with something close to sadness. "Neither did we, but it doesn't change the truth. You're connected to us now, Imani. We feel it. You feel it too." Imani's chest tightened. She wanted to argue, to dismiss it as some strange Valkari ritual that meant nothing to her. But she couldn't. The truth had been gnawing at her ever since they had first touched. It wasn't just in her mind, it was in her blood. She could feel the connection weaving tighter, pulling her toward them, toward something bigger than she'd ever known. Before she could respond, Sonara appeared, her tall frame casting long shadows as she stepped into the room. Her silver eyes gleamed, their intensity locking onto Imani with unnerving precision. "Alethea is right," she said, her voice low and steady. "We may not have chosen this bond, but it is real. Fethrin selected you for a reason. We have to trust in that." Imani's mouth felt dry. "I didn't ask for any of this," she said, her voice rough with the weight of her uncertainty. "I didn't ask to be responsible for you. For this." Sonara's gaze softened, just a fraction, as if she could see the fear Imani kept hidden beneath her hard exterior. "We don't expect you to carry this alone, Imani. The bond doesn't make you our keeper. It makes you our equal, our partner." The word hung in the air like a challenge, and Imani felt her pulse quicken. Partner. The idea terrified her more than she cared to admit. She had always been alone, by choice. Alone meant freedom. It meant control. But now, staring at these two women, both beautiful and powerful in ways that scared her, Imani felt something crack inside her defenses. For the first time in her life, she wasn't sure if she wanted to be alone anymore. Alethea stepped closer again, her voice softer this time. "You don't have to be afraid, Imani. The bond isn't a cage. It's a connection, one that can make us stronger, if you let it." Imani swallowed hard, her mind racing with 1,000 conflicting thoughts. She wanted to fight it, to push them away. But standing here, in the glow of the biocore, with Sonara's steady gaze and Alethea's soft touch grounding her, Imani felt the walls she'd built her whole life beginning to crumble. "I don't know how to do this," she finally admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Sonara's hand rested gently on her shoulder, her touch firm but reassuring. Neither do we. But we'll figure it out together. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was filled with the unspoken promise of something new, something powerful. Imani felt it settle into her bones, into the very core of her being. This bond, this tie that had bound them, was no longer something she could run from. It was hers now, and she was ready to face it. The Resolute was a silent predator, cutting through the stars like a blade as it moved deeper into uncharted territory. Imani gripped the ship's controls tighter than she had in years. Her eyes flickered between the radar, where an ominous cluster of blips grew closer, and the vast darkness of space outside the cockpit window. The Kralith cartel wasn't just shadowing them anymore, they were moving in for the kill. Behind her, Sonara and Alethea stood side by side, a united front in the face of the impending storm. The tension in the air was palpable, thickening with every passing second. Imani could feel it pressing against her skin, a weight that only deepened as the reality of their situation took hold. "They've found us," Imani said, her voice low but edged with resolve. "We've got 3 ships closing in from the rear. Heavy artillery, from the looks of it." Sonara's silver eyes narrowed as she stepped forward, her presence a calming, commanding force. "They want the biocore," she said, her voice as cold and sharp as a blade. "They'll tear us apart to get it." Alethea moved closer to Imani, her hand brushing against her shoulder. A simple gesture, but one that sent a wave of heat through Imani's body. "We can't let them board the ship," Alethea murmured, her usual playfulness gone, replaced by a fierce determination. "If they get inside, they'll be impossible to stop." Imani swallowed hard, her pulse quickening as the proximity alarm blared to life. The ships were closing in fast, too fast. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to focus. She'd been in tight situations before, fought off more than a few pirates in her day. But this was different. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about protecting something bigger than herself. "Strap in," she said, her voice hardening as her fingers danced across the controls. "This is gonna get rough." The Resolute jolted as the first barrage of fire slammed into the ship's shields. Alarms wailed through the cabin as the ship bucked and shuddered under the assault. Imani gritted her teeth, her heart racing as she swung the ship into a sharp dive, narrowly dodging another volley of lasers. "They're cutting off our escape." Alethea shouted over the blaring alarms, her fingers gripping the back of Imani's chair as the ship lurched again. "We're pinned in." "I know." Imani barked, sweat beading on her forehead as she pushed the ship's thrusters to their limit. "I just need one shot, one gap, and I'll get us out of here." A massive explosion rocked the ship, throwing Imani forward into the console. Pain flared in her chest, but she ignored it, pushing the ship harder as red lights flashed across the cockpit. The Kralith ships were relentless, raining fire down on them like a predator playing with its prey. "Shields are failing," Sonara said, her voice unnervingly calm, even as the situation spiraled out of control. "We have minutes before they break through." Imani's mind raced, her breath coming in short, sharp bursts. They were outnumbered, outgunned. The Resolute wasn't built for this kind of sustained combat. Every option, every maneuver played out in her head, and every single one ended with them being torn apart in the cold, empty void. But she wasn't giving up. Not yet. "I have an idea," she said through gritted teeth, turning to face Sonara and Alethea. "It's crazy, and we might not survive it, but it's all we've got." Sonara's eyes flashed, a glimmer of approval in her gaze. "What is it?" Imani's fingers moved over the controls with practiced speed, pulling up the ship's schematics on the flickering holo display. "There's a cluster of asteroid fields dead ahead. If I can maneuver us through them, it might buy us enough time to get our shields back online and regroup. But it's a gamble. One wrong move, and we're done." Alethea grinned, the fire in her eyes rekindled. "I like those odds." Sonara placed a hand on Imani's shoulder, the rare warmth of her touch sending a surge of energy through Imani's veins. "We trust you," she said, her voice soft but unyielding. "Do what you must." Imani didn't waste another second. She pushed the ship into a steep dive, the stars spinning wildly around them as they hurtled toward the asteroid field. The Kralith ships followed, their weapons firing in a continuous barrage, but Imani held firm, her hands steady on the controls. The asteroids loomed ahead, massive chunks of rock spinning in chaotic orbits. Imani's focus narrowed, her world reduced to the flashing lights of the cockpit and the deadly obstacles that filled the space before them. Her breath came in shallow, controlled bursts as she weaved the ship between the asteroids, the hull groaning in protest as they skimmed dangerously close to the jagged edges. Lasers sizzled past the ship, striking the asteroids with thunderous explosions that sent debris scattering in every direction. The Kralith ships were relentless, closing in with terrifying precision. Then, it happened. A direct hit. The ship jolted violently, and Imani's heart stopped as the shields flickered and died. An explosion rocked the Resolute, alarms shrieking as smoke filled the cabin. "Shields are down," Alethea cried, her voice filled with panic. Imani's mind raced. They were out of time. "I'll buy you a window," Sinara said suddenly, her voice steady but final. Before Imani could stop her, she was moving toward the cargo bay, her hand glowing with the power of the biocore, determination etched into every step. "Sinara, wait!" Imani shouted, but it was too late. The door sealed behind her, and Imani felt a cold dread settle over her heart. She whipped the ship around, sending it into a sharp climb through the asteroid field, as explosions thundered all around them. The Kralith ships surged forward, and then, in a flash of blinding light, Sinara unleashed the core's energy. The blast ripped through the nearest enemy ship, a pulse of pure power that sent shockwaves tearing through space. The other ships faltered, thrown off course by the explosion. Imani's breath caught in her throat as she seized the opportunity, pushing the ship to its limits. The Resolute rocketed out of the asteroid field, leaving the shattered remains of the cartel ships in their wake. Silence fell. The ship drifted in the void, the sound of alarms fading into the background as Imani's chest heaved with the effort of it all. They were alive, but at what cost? She glanced toward the sealed cargo bay door, fear gnawing at her insides. Sinara had risked everything to save them, and Imani wasn't sure if she had survived. Imani's fingers trembled as she unbuckled herself from the pilot's seat and moved toward the cargo bay, her heart pounding in her chest. "Sinara," she called, her voice shaking. "Are you okay?" There was a long, agonizing pause. Then, the door slid open, and Sinara stepped out, her expression calm, her body glowing faintly with the remnants of the biocore's energy. "I'm here," she said quietly, her eyes meeting Imani's with a gaze that sent a jolt through her soul. "I'm fine." Imani exhaled in relief, but the weight of what had just happened pressed down on her. They had survived, but the war with the cartel was far from over. As she looked into Sinara's steady gaze and felt Alethea's comforting presence behind her, Imani realized something had shifted. The bond between them had grown stronger, forged in the heat of battle, and there was no going back now. They were tied together, for better or worse. And the fight was far from over. The Resolute drifted through space, limping through the void, its hull scorched and bruised from the fight. The ship was battered, but alive, just like its crew. Imani sat at the helm, staring into the endless blackness outside the cockpit. Her hands were steady on the controls, but inside, everything felt off balance. She could still hear the echoes of the battle, the blaring alarms, the violent impact of enemy fire, the near-silent sacrifice Sinara had made to save them all. Sinara. Imani's gaze flickered toward the rear of the ship, where the cargo bay lay sealed. Sinara was inside, recovering. Alethea had been with her since the moment the fight ended, refusing to leave her mate's side. Imani hadn't gone in yet. She didn't know what to say. She didn't know how to feel. The battle had shaken her to her core, not because of the cartel's relentless assault, but because of what it had forced her to confront. Sinara had risked her life, had nearly sacrificed herself, for them, for her. And Imani hadn't been able to stop her. Imani didn't like feeling powerless. She had spent her whole life making sure she never would be. But when Sinara had sealed that door behind her, there had been nothing Imani could do. She had watched, helpless, as the woman she was slowly beginning to care about walked into the heart of danger, willing to die for them. A quiet hiss broke the silence of the cockpit, and Imani turned to see Alethea stepping into the room. Her movements were slower than usual, her ever-present energy subdued by exhaustion. Her violet eyes found Imani's, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. "How is she?" Imani finally asked, her voice rougher than she'd intended. Alethea's lips curved into a soft smile, but there was no light behind it. "She'll recover," she said, leaning against the edge of the console. The biocore took a toll on her body, but she's strong, stronger than even she realizes. Imani nodded, relief flooding through her in a rush that almost made her dizzy. She hadn't even realized she'd been holding her breath. Alethea tilted her head, watching Imani with those perceptive eyes, as if she could see the storm raging inside her. "You haven't gone to see her yet," she said, her voice gentle but with an unspoken question beneath it. Imani clenched her jaw, her hands tightening on the armrests of her chair. I don't know what to say," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "She almost died out there, and I couldn't stop her. I should have been able to stop her." Alethea stepped closer, her fingers brushing against Imani's shoulder. The touch was soft, comforting, but there was a firmness to it, too. She did what she had to do, Imani, to protect us, to protect you. That's what the bond is. It's not about control or power. It's about trust. Imani looked up at her, her chest tightening. And what if I don't know how to trust it? She asked, her voice raw. I didn't ask for this bond. I didn't ask to care. Alethea's smile softened, something like understanding flickering in her eyes. Neither did we, she said, her voice quiet. But it doesn't change the fact that we do care. And that bond is only going to get stronger. You can fight it all you want, but it's already there, Imani. It's already a part of you. Imani exhaled shakily, her hands falling to her lap. She could feel the truth of Alethea's words settling deep inside her, undeniable and heavy. The bond was real. The connection between them was growing stronger, day by day, whether she wanted it or not. And the thought of losing either of them, Sinara or Alethea, was terrifying in a way Imani hadn't felt in years. I'm scared, Imani admitted, the words leaving her before she could stop them. I don't know how to do this. Alethea's fingers trailed down Imani's arm, her touch lingering for just a moment before she pulled away. You don't have to do it alone, she said softly. That's the whole point. The two women sat in silence for a long time, the weight of the battle, the bond, and everything between them hanging heavy in the air. Finally, Alethea stood, her movements slow but graceful. She extended a hand toward Imani, her eyes soft with understanding. Come with me, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She's been asking for you. Imani hesitated for a brief moment, but then she reached out, taking Alethea's hand. Together, they walked through the quiet corridors of the ship, the hum of the engines a distant sound, as they made their way toward the cargo bay. When the door slid open, Sinara was lying on one of the makeshift beds, her skin still glowing faintly with the remnants of the biocore's energy. Her silver eyes flickered open as they entered, and when her gaze met Imani's, something unspoken passed between them. Imani walked over to her, her heart pounding in her chest. You shouldn't have done that, she said, her voice soft but filled with emotion. You didn't have to risk yourself like that. Sinara's lips curved into a faint smile, her hand reaching out to take Imani's. It was my choice, she said, her voice steady despite her exhaustion, just as it was yours to protect us. Imani knelt beside her, their hands still entwined. For the first time, she let herself feel the weight of the bond, the connection that had formed between them. It was no longer something she could deny. I don't know what this is, Imani whispered, her voice barely audible. But I'm not running from it anymore. Sinara's smile widened, her eyes softening with something that looked dangerously close to affection. Good, she murmured, because neither are we. Imani's heart swelled as she looked at Sinara, then at Alethea, who had moved to stand beside them, her gaze filled with quiet warmth. For the first time in a long time, Imani didn't feel alone. They were tied together now, their fates intertwined in ways she couldn't yet fully understand. But whatever came next, whatever battles, whatever dangers lay ahead, they would face it together, and for the first time, that didn't scare her. It felt right. The soft glow of the Resolute's internal lights bathed the crew quarters in a warm golden hue. The atmosphere, once tense and uncertain, now held an odd sense of peace, a fragile calm that Imani had been reluctant to acknowledge but could no longer ignore. She stood at the edge of the room, watching as Sinara and Alethea spoke quietly to each other near the holographic map that hovered above the center console. For days now, Imani had felt the bond between them growing stronger, tightening in ways she hadn't expected. She had resisted it at first, trying to keep her distance, trying to convince herself that this connection was nothing more than a strange obligation. But after the battle with the cartel, after Sinara's near sacrifice and the quiet, intimate moments that followed, everything had changed. There was no running from it anymore. The bond wasn't just some Valkari custom, some burden she could pass off as a job to be done and forgotten. It was real, and it had become a part of her in ways she hadn't thought possible. She felt it now, that pull deep in her chest, in her very bones. It wasn't just about protecting them, it was about being with them, truly being with them. Sinara, with her strength and quiet grace, and Alethea, with her playful spirit and unshakable loyalty. Imani had spent her life building walls around herself, hiding behind the isolation of space and her cargo runs, but these two women had found a way through, and they weren't letting go. The thought should have terrified her, but all it did was leave her feeling home. Alethea caught her gaze and smiled, the familiar spark of mischief in her violet eyes. You're staring, Captain, she teased, tilting her head slightly as if daring Imani to look away. Something on your mind? Imani's lips twitched into a reluctant smile, but she didn't look away. Just thinking, she said, her voice soft, about how things have changed. Sonara moved toward her, her silver eyes calm but piercing, always seeming to see right through her. You've been different since the battle, Sonara said, her voice low and steady. You've been quieter, more distant. Imani exhaled, running a hand through her hair. I've just been trying to make sense of it all, she admitted. This bond, everything that's happened, it's a lot to process. Alethea stepped forward, her expression softening. We know this hasn't been easy for you, Imani. We didn't expect you to embrace the bond right away. But you've already shown us that you care. You risked everything to protect us. Imani shook her head, the weight of the last few days pressing down on her chest. It's not just about protection anymore, she said quietly. It's more than that. Sonara's gaze softened as she came to stand beside Alethea. Then what is it? Imani hesitated, feeling the words sticking in her throat. She had never been good at this, at opening herself up, at letting people in. But something inside her had shifted, something that she couldn't deny any longer. She swallowed hard and met their eyes, her heart pounding in her chest. It's you, she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. Both of you, this bond, I'm not fighting it anymore. I can't. I don't want to. The admission hung in the air like a weight lifted from her shoulders, and she felt a strange sense of relief wash over her. The tension that had knotted itself inside her for so long began to unravel, replaced by something warm, something steady. Alethea's smile softened, and she reached out, taking Imani's hand in hers. The touch was light, gentle, but it sent a ripple of warmth through Imani's entire body. You don't have to fight anymore, Alethea said softly. We're not asking for anything other than what you're willing to give. We've already accepted you, Imani. We've already embraced the bond. Sonara stepped closer, her hand resting on Imani's other arm. Her touch was firm, steadying. You are part of us now, Sonara said, her voice quiet but filled with conviction. Not just because of the bond, but because we choose you. As you choose us. Imani's chest tightened at the words. The walls she had built up for so long were crumbling around her, and for the first time she wasn't scrambling to hold them together. She wanted them to fall. I choose you, Imani said, her voice stronger now, the certainty behind the words surprising even her. I don't know what this is going to look like. I don't know what the future holds. But I know I'm done running. I'm done fighting this. Alethea smiled, her eyes gleaming with warmth and something deeper, something like love. We're with you, Captain, she whispered, stepping closer until their faces were only inches apart. Wherever this leads, we're with you. Imani's heart raced as Sonara leaned in, her silver eyes locked on Imani's. Together, she said, her voice a quiet promise. And then, before Imani could say anything else, Alethea kissed her. The warmth of it was immediate, enveloping her in a way that made her entire body hum with the energy of the bond. It wasn't rushed or desperate. It was steady, grounded, filled with the quiet understanding that had grown between them. When Alethea pulled away, Sonara's lips found hers next. The kiss was different, firmer, more commanding, but just as filled with meaning. Imani's heart pounded in her chest, but for once it wasn't from fear. When they finally broke apart, Imani exhaled, feeling like she had finally stepped into something she had been resisting for far too long. I'm in, she whispered, her voice filled with quiet resolve. Whatever this is, I'm all in. Alethea grinned, her eyes sparkling with that familiar mischief. Then let's see where this bond takes us. As the three of them stood together in the soft glow of the ship's lights, Imani felt the bond settle into place. No longer a weight, but something lighter, something stronger. It wasn't just the Valkari custom that bound them now. It was choice, love, and the unbreakable tie that had formed between them. And for the first time, Imani felt truly free. The stars stretched out endlessly before them, glittering against the inky blackness of space. Imani sat in the captain's chair, staring out at the horizon of the universe, her mind unusually quiet. The hum of the ship's engines was steady and soothing, filling the Resolute with a sense of peace she hadn't felt in a long time. But the peace wasn't just in the ship. It was inside her now, too. It had been days since they'd escaped the clutches of the cartel, days spent drifting through space, licking their wounds, and figuring out what came next. The adrenaline had worn off, the immediate danger had passed, and for the first time, Imani found herself with the luxury of simply being, and being with them. Behind her, she could hear the soft murmur of voices. Sonara and Alethea were leaning over the holomap, their heads bent together, plotting their next move. It was such a simple thing. Two women, one with eyes of silver, and the other with eyes of violet, quietly discussing trade routes and star charts. But to Imani, it was everything. They had made it through the storm, through the violence and fear, through the confusion of what the bond had meant and what it had done to them. And now, here they were, planning a future together. Our future, Imani thought, the words settling deep inside her chest with a warmth that surprised her. She stood, walking over to where Sonara and Alethea were discussing their plans, her hands slipping easily into her jacket pockets. The moment she approached, Alethea looked up, her smile wide and infectious as she reached out, her fingers curling lightly around Imani's wrist. "There you are," Alethea teased, her eyes dancing with that familiar mischief. "We were just talking about our next adventure. Care to join us?" Imani raised an eyebrow, glancing between them. "Next adventure? I thought we were done with the whole nearly dying thing." Sonara's lips twitched into a rare, amused smile. "We're Valkari, Captain. There's no such thing as done. We merely choose where we go next." Imani chuckled, the sound low and warm in her chest. She had always been the lone wolf, the one who chose solitude over connection, always keeping a distance from those around her. But that had changed. It had changed the moment she had accepted this bond, this life with Sonara and Alethea. She had chosen them, and they had chosen her. Alethea tugged lightly at her arm, pulling her closer. "We're thinking of heading toward the Valkari outpost near the edge of the Centauri system," she said, leaning in conspiratorially. "Rumor has it there's a relic there that might be connected to the biocore. Something powerful, something worth exploring." Imani tilted her head, a smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "More powerful than the biocore? Sounds dangerous." Alethea's eyes gleamed with excitement. "Exactly." Sonara folded her arms across her chest, watching the exchange with a calm, knowing look. "We would understand if you wanted to take a less dangerous route. After all, you're human. You aren't bound to our ways. The bond doesn't force you to stay with us." Imani shook her head, stepping in closer, her gaze flicking between Sonara and Alethea. "I didn't choose this bond because I was forced into it. I chose it because I want it. I'm not going anywhere. We're in this together, no matter how dangerous it gets." Sonara's silver eyes softened, and for a moment, Imani thought she saw something break through the stoic exterior the Valkari woman always maintained, a flicker of vulnerability, of gratitude. "You are one of us now," Sonara said softly, her voice like a quiet vow. "Whatever we face it together." Imani felt a lump form in her throat, but she swallowed it down, unwilling to break the moment with words. Instead, she reached out, threading her fingers through Sonara's, her grip firm and reassuring. She was no longer the outsider, no longer the human who didn't understand. She was part of this. Part of them. Alethea smiled, stepping in to press a kiss to Imani's cheek, the warmth of it sending a shiver through her. "Well then," Alethea said brightly, her playful tone returning. "If we're all agreed, let's get started. There's a whole galaxy out there waiting for us." Imani let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. She looked out at the star map, at the endless possibilities that lay ahead, and for the first time in years, the future didn't feel like a solitary journey. It felt like something they would build together, one adventure at a time. They had faced danger together, risked their lives together. But more than that, they had built something stronger than the biocore or any technology they could ever find. They had built a bond, one forged in battle, in trust, and in love. A bond that no cartel, no danger, no force in the universe could break. Imani pulled Sonara and Alethea closer, her chest swelling with a quiet, steady happiness she hadn't felt in a long time. "All right," she said, her voice low but filled with anticipation. "Let's see where the stars take us." With that, the Resolute powered forward, leaving the remnants of the past behind them. The galaxy stretched out before them, wild, dangerous, and full of possibility. But whatever came next, they would face it together. As the ship sailed through the void, Imani, Sonara, and Alethea stood side by side, their futures intertwined, their bond unbreakable. Together they would carve out their place in the stars.